So good morning, welcome back. We're really pleased now to be moving into our next panel session, which consists of 4 speakers. Mark Bachman, who's talking about security, Saskia Gerhardy talking about engagement, Greg Williams talking about enterprise, and Clinton Wanganeen talking about partnerships. And I'm going to start by introducing Mark. Mark Bachman is the Principal Ecologist and Manager, Nature Glenelg Trust. Mark has been working on a range of environmental issues in the southeast of South Australia and southwest Victoria for the past 20 years. In 1999, Mark made the decision to move permanently from Adelaide to Mount Gambier with his young family. He was so passionate about the conservation there. And during this time, he also purchased and continues to manage his own privately held bushland properties, so that's plural, not singular, for conservation, so very busy. He also told me that last night he only had 4 hours sleep because he played in a basketball match and it went to overtime and he had the deciding goal. And he missed. So he might need a little bit of cheering up today. With his commitment to conservation, in January 2012, Mark led the launch of a new not-for-profit environmental organisation called Nature Glenelg Trust, which he'll be speaking about today. So can we welcome Mark?
Thank you, Leanne, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to be covering a lot of ground, and because it's a lot of ground in only 10 minutes, I'm going to be fairly light on for detail. So excuse me if there are things that you'll be questioning when you hear some of these examples, but I can't go into all of the information that sits behind them. The other thing is, I gave a talk once where I put black screens up so that you concentrate on what I'm saying, and I had people in the audience yelling out to me, "Your screen's gone black." I'm going, "It's deliberate," you know. So that's going to happen in this talk as well. So just bear that in mind. When the screen goes black, it's okay. Just concentrate on what I'm saying. Now look, I've decided to break this talk up into 3 components to illustrate how different notions of environmental security underpin the way we can deliver on-ground outcomes. While at times we might debate the detail, one thing I think we can all agree on is that we want to see our efforts result in a lasting environmental impact. With that in mind, I hope these ideas will provide you with a framework for constructively critiquing the environmental action that you hear about at this conference, as well as reflecting on how you deliver your own projects in the future. Firstly, let's consider a relatively safe topic to get things started, and that's security of tenure. Now, when you consider that this topic includes both public and private land, it is a prime example of where the world of government policy meets on-ground conservation. The Protected Area Reserve System in Australia, created through state-based legislation, provides the fundamental backbone for biodiversity conservation in this country. Thank goodness our predecessors, in many cases non-government groups, had the foresight to advocate for the creation of these community assets and achieve this security of tenure. Obviously, we now need to work hard to ensure this security of tenure isn't eroded into the future. On private land, the story is more complex. A number of different mechanisms exist to achieve security of tenure, from heritage agreements, IPA agreements, conservation covenants or other instruments registered on title, through to less formal management agreements or informal arrangements that aren't binding on future owners. To get people involved, all of these potential methods have a role, but we have to be realistic about their longevity if agreements aren't binding, or, irrespective of that theoretical security if they are, what they may deliver on the ground when landowners aren't provided with any ongoing resourcing. For example, I'm personally concerned that there is a tendency to consider the job done once an area of private land is under a heritage agreement, often leaving this incredibly important group of landholders without tangible support. In the case of Nature Glenelg Trust, we've now restored over 35 wetlands on private land in the agricultural regions of South Australia and Victoria, but so far permanent security of tenure has been achieved for very few. However, this is no accident. We know our farming community well enough to know that this is not an outcome we can push too hard towards or rush towards, or we know we would not have been able to gain their trust in the first place. The key is now to keep in touch with these landholders and rely on their growing awareness of the importance of their site and a desire to see their positive action never undone. I'm extremely optimistic about our longer-term prospects, but accept that this means we have to stick around. You know, you have to stay there and be patient and stay in touch with these people over time. Longevity of programs is a real issue. However, for some sites with unique large-scale restoration potential, NGT has also chosen to become a landholder ourselves. Our first restoration reserve, the 1,700-acre Eaglehawk Waterhole near the western end of the Little Desert National Park, is now destocked and has become our first demonstration site for habitat restoration at a large scale in the agricultural regions of South Australia. Once restored, a property-scale heritage agreement will ensure the outcomes we achieve there will be permanently secured. The psychology of this for me is really quite important, because when we, NGT, ask landholders to think about long-term security of tenure, we're genuinely speaking to them as equals. We're doing it ourselves, and I can also say personally, I'm doing it myself as a landholder. Next up, let's consider a much more complex topic, and this is a personal favourite of mine that might put a native cat amongst the pigeons in the room. Often the first of these processes happens with security of tenure. For example, traditional activities like putting up a fence to exclude stock from a patch of bushland is a way of sustainably removing a negative ecological process, allowing for ongoing recovery and regeneration of native plants. Another ecological process that has gained a lot more attention in recent times is the traditional use of fire to manage landscapes. But there are also other processes that people don't think about so often that I'd also like you to consider. One of my personal favourites is the use of water, specifically the restoration of artificially drained wetlands, because of the capacity to initiate a dramatic, spontaneous, self-sustaining process of habitat recovery. In the case of a site like Mount Burr Swamp, NGT's second restoration reserve, the upfront costs may have been higher to secure the land, but the ongoing costs of recovering the ecological values of this site are lower because we are working with nature and natural processes that favour the wetland species that are adapted to take advantage of the new conditions we've recreated. And best of all, hydrological restoration at a semi-permanent wetland like this benefits from the creation of a positive feedback loop. By that, in simple terms, I mean that the site will continue to get better through time, all by itself, once we've initiated that first step. Now, that is a secure ecological process in my book. But what about the elephant in the room that very few of us will willingly want to talk openly about? Anyone guess what this might be? My contention is that on the mainland, the landscape has been subdued for so long that we've simply forgotten about what a normal terrestrial ecosystem actually looks like. Forget the reference states that ecologists like to talk about when they walk around a patch of bushland, because in the southern states of Australia we simply don't have any. That is because our ecosystems are missing much of their ground-dwelling fauna and the critical ecological functions that they used to provide. Take, for example, the Clare Hills around us today. Early newspaper articles from around this area, and I've got one here that people can look at later if they're interested, talk about the abundant wildlife found in this very area, including species that you might still see in many parts of South Australia today, such as ringtail possums, all manner of birds. Curlews were up here once, kangaroos and euros, but also species that you won't, such as dingoes, quolls, or native cats as they were then known, bettongs, bilbies and wallabies. One account also spoke of hunting feral cats, which were considered more vicious than the native cat, and even the arrival of the fox, to which the author said, "I thought it was a dingo when I saw it lying in a hollow tree. When it hopped out and I noticed its bushy tail or its brush, I was so astounded that I forgot to take rapid aim and its escape in the undergrowth was then made easy." Imagine that today, being astounded to see a fox. Today we would be astounded to see a quoll, a bilby or a bettong, species that were then taken for granted. The author didn't realise it then, but as we all now know, the fundamentals of mainland ecosystems were dramatically changing, triggering a collapse that we still haven't recovered from. And humans played a huge role in facilitating that process of change, first and foremost by successfully eradicating the dingo in many temperate regions of southern Australia, just as the fox was arriving, intensifying its impact with devastating effect for our small mammals. This also means that for much of the past 120 years, many areas of southeastern mainland Australia have had no native apex mammal predator, but have been plagued by an ever-increasing list of overabundant exotic and native herbivores and the unregulated impact of introduced mesopredators like the fox and the feral cat. The challenge remains that to re-establish this long-forgotten ecological process demands a complete change in philosophy and approach from farmers, environmental managers and policymakers alike. It would require us to challenge ourselves about deeply held convictions on the mainland that have evolved over the past century in the absence of our native predators. For instance, our native predators have been gone for so long, we've mistakenly assumed that removing introduced predators alone from the system will somehow fix everything. But I think we all know deep down, and all the available data suggests from places where this has been done, that the solution just isn't that simple, meaning we won't sustainably address many of our biggest environmental management challenges until this missing ecological process is returned. Some people call this rewilding. Let's be brave and continue a conversation about how and where on the mainland this might take place as a trial, accepting that it won't be easy. But it will be worth it because nature and natural processes are waiting to be put to work to benefit our natural environment and truly have the capacity to deliver self-sustaining results, much like the example with water earlier. The final issue I'd like to raise is one that underlines the value of community groups and the role of the not-for-profit sector in Landcare, and that is security of organisational purpose. It's a key reason why I started Nature Glenelg Trust, in actual fact. While government will always have a crucial role to play in helping to manage and fund environmental programs on behalf of the community, we all know that this model has its challenges. Probably the most fundamental of these is the exposure of government policy to short-term election cycles and wider economic trends. This often erodes the ability to deliver long-term secure outcomes. But the perfect complement to this more volatile system is the stable, ongoing presence of community groups, many of you represented in the room, and the not-for-profit environmental sector, which I'm extremely proud to represent in speaking to you today. I encourage you all to reflect on the incredible collective asset that we have in the room outside of government agencies, our sustained clarity of purpose and our persistence. We're not going anywhere. Environmental security requires that type of long-term commitment. Let's ensure that the sector continues to benefit from our skills and diversity, and I hope the next 2 days gives you an appreciation of just how much we can achieve across this whole sector, government, non-government, community groups, private enterprise, when we all work together. Thank you very much.
Just stay there for a minute, Mark, because I've just got a question for you before we go to our next speaker. You spoke about rewilding.
Yes.
Within the context of security, which is your theme for this conversation. Can you just tell us a bit more about the rewilding? Not rewiring, rewilding.
Well, some people in the room might have been involved in discussion the state agency had probably a month or so ago in Adelaide about this topic, and I am concerned that we make sure that our definition of what we mean by rewilding stays on track, because it is the latest sexy term in environmental management. Let's do some rewilding. What existing projects are we working on that we could rebadge as rewilding? Because that'll mean we get funding for them. I kid you not, this is how people think. It's not, to me, that's a perverse outcome. Rewilding in its purest form is using these processes that we were talking about to initiate a change that doesn't require ongoing human intervention. And to me, this has got to be the goal of environmental management, accepting there are some things, particularly in our very modified ecosystems, that probably will still always involve some level of intervention, weeds for instance. But there are some overarching issues that can certainly be addressed in this way. These aren't, so I guess for me the rewilding can take many forms. There's I guess to give you an example of how differently the trajectory of the mainland has gone as a result of one difference in ecological process compared to a little laboratory of the mainland called Tasmania, where repeated attempts to introduce the fox through the 1800s failed. There's lots of records of people trying to get the fox to establish down there. Cats have been there since day dot. So all the other issues are the same, really, from the mainland to there, except one key ingredient. Because the land bridge between the mainland and Tasmania was flooded before the dingo made it down there, they still had two predators in Tasmania that the mainland doesn't. Now, the thylacine, despite the occasional video that comes out claiming they're still there, I don't hold great hope for them. But they still have the devil, just because they're in trouble. And that is the key ingredient. That one key ingredient modifies the behaviour of cats sufficiently to protect other mammals and appears to have had an effect of repelling the ability for foxes to establish. Now, people in Tassie, farmers, still hate devils because everybody seems to hate predators, full stop. And this is the shift in mindset that I think we need to think about. But if you look at the result, which is that if you went to the Otways or the Kabobani, down the area that I work in, the southeastern part of the continent, even some parts, the wet parts, the Adelaide Hills, the mammal fauna was very similar in Tasmania to there 150 years ago. The instant we knocked the dingoes out and the fox arrived, it all got flipped on its head. And now we just think that the Tassie is this magical place where everything's so different. But the key difference is one species, and they still have their quolls, their bettongs, their, all these process initiators in an ecosystem. So food for thought. There are no simple answers to this, but unless we face up to some of this stuff, I don't know anyone who thinks that fox baiting for the rest of existence is a good idea either. Like, it's not a sustainable activity in my book, so I'm not suggesting I have all the answers, but I think food for thought. Hopefully it gets you thinking.
Great, thank you.